Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to Published. In this episode, we are recapping the past year of the Published podcast and highlighting some of our best advice for authors. This year, we covered a wide range of topics on the publishing industry, from how to begin your very first draft all the way to distributing and marketing tips for your book launch. Today, we'll revisit our experts' advice for every stage of the publishing process and share the most valuable bits of wisdom from each conversation. Today, we're joined by Jenya De Lima. As an awards judge for 3 book award programs, Jenya will share her behind-the-scenes knowledge of how winners are selected and how to stand out to judges. What are the judges looking for? What makes something stand out? Do they read the whole book?
Yes, we do have to read the whole book. So that's something that we really have to commit to. So just know that we are also reading it analytically. We're not just reading it as a reader. And so we probably are bringing in an editorial perspective or something similar. With a lot of the books, it's going to start with your cover. We are asked to judge the cover and to say if it drew us in, if the font was hard to read, did we think there was too much white space? Did the cover depict what we found inside? Did it give us a hint as to what this book is about, what the themes might be, that sort of thing? And I know in some cases that can be as heavy as like 20% of your overall score.
With the exception of a book cover award, I had never thought about the actual cover being that impactful.
Well, it shows that you have familiarity with the market and that you understand your genre. And so it's kind of like when you're doing a query and we want to see comps. This, in a way, is showing that you've really paid attention to comps and that you understand like the genre expectations and that sort of thing. Because also, too, they have to think about the marketability of a book or even the recognition that people are going to have with it. So if they put it out on a shelf or they're at a convention, because I know like one of these award ceremonies is going to a large librarians convention soon, where they're going to have over 600 librarians present. And so they might be going through these books and seeing which ones do they want to add to their libraries. But if they can't instantly tell that this is narrative nonfiction, fantasy, YA, they're likely to pass by it even with the award emblem on there just because they don't know how to categorize it. So my advice really too is to make sure that when you are submitting your book to an award, you need to be taking it as seriously as you would be if you were submitting this to an agent or an acquisitions editor, because we really are looking at the entire package. It isn't just one thing. We're not looking at just story or just character arcs or just character development, or if you brought a new view to something, which are also all things that we look at.
So if the book cover is as much as 20%, can you break down the rest of it for us?
Yeah, it does depend on the awards programs. And then it also depends on the round of judging you're in. So if I'm possibly in the 3rd round of judging, I might just be asked to list in order 1, 2, 3. Would I give this 1st place, 2nd place, or 3rd place? But earlier on, we'll receive, granted it's all online, so a virtual online packet. And we are going through and answering all these questions, usually on a scale of 1 to 10, and then providing paragraphs of text explaining our answers. Why do I think that the character arc was flawed and didn't come to fruition? Why do I think this person didn't establish that they really are an authority on this subject? Do I think this person had anything new to add? Do I agree with the genre that this was placed in? And then with romance, of course, we have to answer whether it has a happily ever after, because that's a really big part. And if it doesn't have that, it's an automatic no. So that's another reason why we have to read all the way to the end.
Today, we're joined by Maggie Langrick, a creativity coach and founding publisher at Wonderwell Press, to talk about book titling. What's the goal of a title and a subtitle, and what is it trying to accomplish?
Back in a former life, long time ago, when I was a copywriter at newspapers and magazines, I used to write headlines as part of my job. And writing a title is very similar to that. It has to perform some of the same functions. The title has to tell the reader what's in the book, what the book is about, but it's not just a literal description. It's got to grab their attention in a way that connects with them emotionally, piques their interest, and invites curiosity, makes them want to explore further. I like to think of it as this way. A really great title and subtitle. First of all, let's think of those things as a package. The title itself is not enough. The title and subtitle must never be considered in a vacuum separately from each other. They really work together as a package. So together, what they need to do is describe the book's content clearly and accurately, typically leaning into the benefits. Second job is to indicate who the book is for. So if you can really speak to the reader directly or mention them, sort of guide for parents or, whatever it is to sort of say, this is for you, that's the second job. The third job the title package has to do is to set the reader's expectations for what the reading experience itself will be like. So that can include getting your personality and the tone or style, of the book across. And what I mean by that is it funny? Is it urgent? Is it soothing, easy to digest, cerebral, complex? What are the various attributes of the book itself? Because that sort of subliminally just slips into the reader's mind as they're reading it and tells them what to expect. And the fourth thing that it has to do is really be memorable and distinctive. If they can't remember the title, they're not going to remember the book.
Right. That stickiness has to be there too. And I think so often people take that piece for granted and they forget that very often we talk about books in conversations and water cooler conversations, or we hear someone being interviewed on the radio or whatever. And if we can't hold on to the name of that book, we lose that opportunity then for that person to go look it up and find it and buy it.
An important point that I wanted to make about the title subtitle, you can be a kind of oblique and a little sort of more poetic in one of those, but at least one or two of those elements needs to be absolutely literal and direct. Title grabs your interest and then the subtitle tells you exactly what it means. Sometimes the formula is to flip it. You can be super direct and obvious in the title, and then the subtitle for a little bit of poetry and getting some of those feel-good responses in. The book of practical nonfiction really needs to be extremely clear and usually benefit driven. And I think that is true across all of the categories within the nonfiction genre, whether you're talking about business, personal growth, or health. The distinctions and like how you sort of slice and parse the various titling guidelines are going to have more to do with the type of author that it is and what their personal brand is, and also who the reader is and what their pain points are.
Yes, I 100% agree. And as a little bit of backstory, so before coming into the publishing world 20 years ago, I was a television producer. And in a case of Worlds Colliding, one of my beats was books. Mm-hmm. And the pitch is so fast. So back then I was on the receiving end, the pitch that a publicist would deliver to me to try to get my attention about a book. And now, of course, as a publisher and distributor, I'm on the pitching end, and you see these buyers or producers or whoever you're trying to get the attention of, and they're getting pitched just like massive volumes.
Yeah.
And so when you get the title that makes someone sit up a little bit straighter because you really hit them over the head with the benefit or the value or the problem that you're solving, it's worth its weight in gold. And I've seen it happen, and you have them. They literally like lean in. If you want your book to be read around the world, there's a good chance you'll need to publish versions in different territories and also have your book translated into other languages. In this episode, Terry will explain the difference between foreign and translation rights, how to negotiate with publishers outside of your territory, and what an author should know if they want to publish internationally.
My name is Terry Wolf. I am a literary agent and rights manager. So that means that I can do anything across the board, from movie rights to translation rights to foreign rights to serialization, anything that's in those contracts that people are afraid of. That's what I manage. So.
This is a question that I think comes up a lot. For that translated work, who owns the copyright?
The author owns the copyright always. So, and it says in the book, there's this little phrase in English, which is so funny. In the middle of a book produced in Japan, it's still in English, and so always the author. So and that's one of the things that I make sure of, is that when I receive that final proof, there it is. And people get confused by that because they think, well, wait a second, we translated it, we should get the rights. No, not the way it works.
So how do you personally decide or look at something and say, yes, I think it will sell or travel well, as we sometimes put it when we're thinking about foreign rights? Are there certain genres or subjects that, as a rule, do better?
For a long time, the Scandinavians had the market in mystery, for example. I mean, there was that little book about the girl something with the dragon tattoo, I think it was. And, everybody wanted those books. And we learned that they cornered that market for a long time. So I truthfully didn't sell a lot of mystery at that time. You kind of have to view it from their side of the fence, so to speak. So if they don't want, we'll just say if they don't want guns involved, then I probably can't sell quite a few of the mysteries that we represent. If they are in a communistic country, they're probably not going to want a lot of business books that talk about the freedom to do what you please. It doesn't mean that they don't want to learn. It just means they probably can't acquire it. We also experienced, of course, that shortage, that supply chain. Well, we were experiencing it. So was the rest of the world. So, for example, I had a book that was going to France, and they couldn't do it because the only paper that they could acquire was sort of the stuff that we would put a formal resume on. Well, as you can imagine, it would be very expensive to produce books on that. So we had to wait until they started getting paper. And the problem with that was that then they started getting sort of that onion skin paper, that very thin paper. So, and they would laugh about it. The French laugh and they say, oh, this is, c'est la vie. This is the way it works. But, the American was not so happy. So it's really interesting when you have that book sitting, on your coffee table and somebody says, well, I didn't know that you spoke Portuguese. Well, I don't, but it's my book.
Yeah, I have one author who really got a kick out of how the Latvian version of his book modified his name. So his name actually read to be like the Latvian interpretation. And
right.
It was this running joke of I'm huge in Latvia.
Yeah. I am so big. Yeah, absolutely. Latvian readers, I have to tell you, they spend a lot on books. And so people tease me when I say, we have Latvian rights. I'm always excited about it. And they kind of go, oh, this is a good thing. Yes, this is a very good thing. I mean, so, and a lot of times, it moves out from there. We have to think about where those countries are located. Almost always if I'm doing German rights, I can almost always do, other, Danish rights, Dutch rights, Belgian rights. And because they see the book, they want the book.
Today we're joined again by Greenleaf's legal counsel, Guy Muller. Guy will explain the most recent developments related to copywriting books produced with AI in the U.S. and address everything authors need to know about protecting themselves and their work.
The main thing that we've seen the last couple of years, especially here really recently with ChatGPT, Midjourney, those types of generative AI, is whether or not the outputs, the stuff that people use those tools to and create, whether or not under copyright law, that's considered human authorship. Of course, there's a lot of things that go into copyright law, but the nuts and bolts and the main thing that I'm going to talk about today is whether or not that's human authorship. Over the years, and way even before generative AI was out, the Copyright Office and the courts have decided that in order to have actual authorship of a work that would qualify for a copyright, it must be created by a human. It must be human authorship. There's cases in the past of things like, monkeys taking photographs with a camera, whether or not they could be considered an author and get copyright. There's even been cases of people that somehow, claim to have spoken to a non-human spiritual being like God, something, and actually saying and going and filing a copyright application for these works, saying that it's actually authored by this non-human spiritual being. And the courts have always rejected things like that. It said, hey, it doesn't work like that. We get it. We appreciate it. But, it has to be authored by a human. So it's those elements. It's that case law, that precedent that has really decided, at least right now, how the Copyright Office is handling works that are being applied and trying to get copyright protection that have been created with generative AI, such as Midjourney again or ChatGPT. There's not enough what they consider creative control to be human authorship. They acknowledge, they say, yes, you might be able to put in this information and you might be able to influence these outputs by these machines. But at the end of the day, that's not enough creative control under the law to actually rise to the level of something that would be qualified for a copyright.
A lot of authors would probably wonder, okay, that's one use, right? To ask it, like you said, Tanya, it wants a new book, write the new book for Tanya, versus generating the ideas that you then may use as a basis for something else. So how does, let's say, idea generation play into all of this? And are there any concerns?
In general, ideas alone are not copyrightable anyway. Let's say if I'm like, hey, Tanya, you should write this new book, and it should be about this, and this, and whatever. And if you go out and you actually write that book and you do it yourself, I don't get to copyright that idea. I don't own that. Ideas are not copyrighted. You actually created it. So it's kind of the same with these machines. It's like asking your friend or something that, has this infinite knowledge, give me an idea for a book. And if it spits out an idea and then you go in and you actually put your own human authorship on top of that, then that's A-okay. It doesn't have to just be idea generation. It can be a lot more than that. It can be plot developments, character, storylines. Of course, you can use it for research, for all kinds of stuff too, for your book. You can use these tools. The main thing is whatever you use, whatever outputs it generates, you can't just take that output and expect to get a copyright on it. Because again, not human authorship. It's simple in theory, but it gets really complex when you apply this stuff.
Today, we're joined by Valerie Howard. So in this episode, Valerie will explain how authors can connect with local bookstores directly in order to host author events and get books on shelves.
The first and foremost why we recommend reaching out to local stores is because they're in your area. You're not flying across country to a store where you maybe don't have the biggest network. And also local store managers really like to meet authors. It's so fun, especially showing your support for your local store by approaching them and saying, I'm a local author. I'd love to partner with you. I always recommend stopping in the bookstore, showing your face, showing that personality alongside the book. Having a physical copy is always a plus, but at least the cover image. Showing them what it looks like, because I know people say, don't judge a book by its cover. Book buyers do judge a book by its cover a lot of the time, as well as, like I said, the marketing plan, how you plan on generating demand for your book, because having it available on online pages is great. There is that large conglomerate monopoly, Amazon, that bookstores don't really want to be reminded exists, and that a lot of book sales go through it. So I wouldn't, mention my last book was an Amazon bestseller, because they want to know what your book is going to do for them.
There are certain requirements that we know if bookstores have before they'll bring a book in, especially I think these would impact some of our self-published friends. But can you speak to some of those standards?
Sure. So bookstores, they usually partner with Ingram, which is the world's largest wholesaler. And it really gives your book and yourself credibility as an author to have an account with Ingram. Bookstores are more likely to bring it in because books are returnable, which is a big, big factor. Say they order 50 copies, but you only sell 40. It gives them more incentive to order through Ingram because they can return the overage. A lot of indie stores, especially I'm seeing lately for self-published or even, print on demand books, they'll ask to do consignment with authors, which is also very totally normal. It's something that authors and bookstores can work out together. And that's where the author, brings in copies to have on display through the bookstore, and then they split the profit, but the bookstore and the author. So it's always great to have consignment alongside an event, because those are going to sell rather than sitting on a shelf. Another reasonable expectation is, especially if this is your first book and, maybe it's a fiction or a children's book, the bookstore might not bring in 30 or 50 copies. They might bring in 10, 15, which is totally fine. They can always order more, but they're always going to err on the conservative side when bringing in books. And another thing to keep in mind is that they're going to ask how you're promoting the book. So coming with a marketing plan in hand or an idea of other ways that you're going to reach out to your local community is always handy to have to show those bookstores.
There are a number of production factors that impact the final product of a book, from design elements that influence the cost of printing to supply chain constraints that can cause printing delays. In this episode, Angela will explain what goes into printing books and what authors should keep in mind if they're planning to do so on their own.
Hi, my name is Angela Olmeta, and my job as print production specialist here at Greenleaf Book Group. Offset printing, you're looking at larger quantities of printing, and the larger the quantity you print, the lower your printing per cost unit will be. It is the better quality printing, and you have lots of choices when it comes to interior paper stock, trim size, and the jacket and cover technology. With that said, when it comes to offset printing, you do have to keep in mind that there are upfront setup costs that are quite high. And based on the quantity that you print, if you're printing 3,000, these books need to live somewhere. So on the back end of offset printing, they need to go to a warehouse and you need to keep track of them. And there could be additional monthly storage costs and the shipping from the warehouse to its final destination. Printing on demand is you print as you need your books. It's a shorter print timeline. You don't have as much upfront costs, and there's no need for storage. With that said, you are looking at a higher cost per print unit when you're printing on demand, and you don't have as many choices when it comes to trim size, interior paper stock, and especially when it comes to extra technology for the jacket or the cover of your book. For authors to decide which way to go, they really, really need to take into consideration the main factors, which is cost, quantity, timeline, and technology.
Yeah, perfect. And well said. I think typically what we see is authors who need, like you said, a small quantity of books fairly quickly will do the print on demand, which is digital print. Like you said, like lower upfront costs and in terms of the setup, but on a price per unit basis. When you start to inch towards, I would say it's like 1,000 units, you start to see this cutoff where it's like, okay, it makes more sense now to go to the offset print run with the assumption again that you've got a place to put these books and you're okay. Those storage costs, as you mentioned.
Offset printing generally takes 6 to 7 weeks. That does not include shipping. We always include about 1 week shipping, but I would include a month to have those books delivered prior to the pub date. So we look at sending our books to print 3 months prior to pub date. That gives us a week or so in case something does go wrong, and things do go wrong. It is a complicated printing process.
There are surprises and delays and things happen with printing, but what are some of the common surprises that authors might experience and any recommendations to avoid those?
I do still see delays in ordering materials. So the extra time buffer that you add, you really will need it, because suddenly I'll send my purchase order in and they say, oh my gosh, this material isn't in. We have to wait 3 weeks. So you wait the 3 weeks, or you just have to be more flexible as an author. The printers are more than happy to give you options that are similar to the interior stock, to the case bound color you picked, or end sheets, or whatever it is that you pick. They're more than happy to give you choices that are already in-house, because they don't carry everything in-house. They can't. Or they will give you options on something that can arrive sooner. So that's one thing. So to be flexible as an author, I think, is very important in that situation. Material delay, but there's also printing and shipping delays. I mean, a printer does go down. And when a printer goes down and they need a part, they're not getting it the next day, sadly. So really add a week or two to your printing and shipping. And then you should be able to make your pub date in that situation. Another thing that I do think surprises authors, we talked about this, that it is amazing, the printers and the setup of the machinery and how it all works and how it all comes together. Well, at times, an author will receive a book that is, a section is upside down, the front is in the back. I mean, it happens. And honestly, it's probably one book out of the 1,000 or 2,000 that they've received. And this happens. Human error is everywhere. Yeah. So this is at the beginning of the printing. They're setting it up and they're catching all these errors and they're fixing them. And they will recycle these books. But sometimes one or two of those books get put in a box and get sent to our warehouse or our author. So, and it happens. Usually offset printers always give you about 5 to 10% overs anyway. So you're not really losing anything there. You use it as a display in the back, or you do something. But that does happen, and printers do try to catch them and not put them in the box. So that's maybe a surprise that they will find.
Today, we're joined by Greenleaf author Claire Eisenthal. Today, Claire gives us the author perspective and shares the ways that she's taken control of her publicity to drive book sales, especially through Substack and Book Talk. One of the things that you've done exceptionally well when I look at how our authors promote their books is kind of meeting the readers where they are, and specifically online. So can you talk a bit about the websites that you use to do that?
I primarily leaned heavily on social media. So whether that's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and now Threads and even Twitter, there's different audiences for each platform. And as a result, one thing that I learned over these past 6 to 7 months is you really need to speak to each of those audiences very differently. Content that you might make in order to promote your book, you can't just kind of like spray it out there and hope that it will stick. You really need to be pretty precise about how you want to speak to people who are on TikTok, because it'll be an entirely different demographic than a group of people who are on a Facebook group, people who are on Instagram, content creators who we call bookstagrammers who talk about books on Instagram that are a lot more closed off about like pitches. And, I haven't gotten as much response and traction when I pitched bookstagrammers as opposed to book talkers. So originally I approached Book Talk that way. And then I started realizing that I should be using Book Talk as a way to really study the market, following book talkers, understanding what tropes they loved, understanding their pet peeves, understanding different comps of books that are similar to mine, engaging with their content, commenting on their videos, reposting their videos, sharing their videos. And that's something that you can do as an author, regardless of your genre, way before your book comes out. And so that way, they actually really recognize you, the people who are creating the videos and the content, and they're more willing to support you because you've been supporting them and their platform for a long period of time. And another important element to Book Talk is that the virality of it is very unpredictable, right? Like, the algorithm, you can't really understand like what's going to do well, what's not. And so engage with Book Talk accounts, even if they look like they have a small follower list, because I've seen small Book Talk accounts blow up very quickly. So Substack is essentially like an online newsletter platform, and it's very easy to use. And I started my Substack, which is called Rising Talent, and it is oriented toward debut authors. And I really try to focus on the content of my newsletter, lessons that I wish I would have known prior to releasing my debut novel, because it is a pretty steep learning curve and there was so much that I didn't know prior to the book coming out. I started this back in January, and there was a few reasons that I started it. One was because I noticed that there is an element, and an important element when you're trying to promote the book, about reciprocity. So, when you want book talkers or people who are on Book Talk who talk about and review books, or people on Instagram who review books and read lots of books, if you want them to consider your book, you can kind of offer them something with this now newsletter that I have to help build their following of authors and get the word out there about their platform that they're also trying to build.
Today, we're joined by Jane Friedman, whose decades of editing, publishing, and consulting expertise inform her reporting on publishing industry news through her blog, janefriedman.com, and her newsletters, Electric Speed and The Hot Sheet.
It became obvious in engaging with readers, in speaking, social media as well, those conversations, that even though I had written about all of this stuff on my blog, people certainly weren't reading every post. They weren't there from the beginning. They did not want to sort through hundreds of pieces to figure out what was applicable to them. Obviously, it wasn't in any kind of structured order, something that would be a comfortable reading experience, because blogs just go on and on and on. And I decided I need to create a book that is basically a best of, or it's a compilation of what I have done, what I have written. Most of it had been on the blog at one point or another. A little bit of it was maybe repurposed from some other material I had written, but more or less that first book I published, it was called literally Publishing 101, was really just a compilation of blog posts. So it was done out of service to my readers, both new and old, who wanted everything kind of in a tidy package.
Mm-hmm. I talk a lot about that in my own book in terms of taking inventory of the content that you already have. I think a lot of writers overlook that and think they have to start from scratch, when I would say my book, probably a good third of it, by the time I created, like, I was such a nerd, like this index of content on an Excel file, like the types of topics, the length it was, and kind of let me hone in on what might be appropriate for the book. And then I really just kind of had to rework those things a little bit. But what a running head start you can get if you've got that stuff that you can repurpose.
I think it works really well for nonfiction, trying to position yourself where you are an expert in a particular field and authority. If you have credentials that are respected on the topic that you're discussing, this is all great fodder, the things that you speak about, teach about, that you consult on, that you coach on, all of that's great fodder for blogging material. And it's rare that I meet nonfiction authors who have no idea what to write about because they're so engaged with their communities and readership.
Can a blog be used like R&D, where if an author is maybe not sure what they should be focusing on in their writing? With nonfiction, that is maybe not so much the point because they've got a career or some life of experience that's probably guiding that. But I personally have sometimes been surprised at the type of content that drives engagement versus not. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize people were going to dork out on that. So is it fair to say that the blog can be a tool to experiment with that and really figure out what's resonating with your readers before you sit down and write the book?
Yeah, it can save you untold hours. It can save you a lot of frustration of doing a book that no one's really interested in what you've actually tackled. They really wish you would have gone in another direction. If you're doing a blog of any kind or a Substack, let's just assume blog and Substack are interchangeable at this point in the conversation. If you're going to be doing those sorts of activities, you're going to see more comments or more likes or more shares on the things that probably belong in your book or that deserve more attention, more discussion. When you hear success stories of people breaking out, really in any form, any medium, it could be TikTok, it could be a podcast. You'll often hear about, well, in the early days, I was just kind of doing this weird thing off to the side. And then one day I posted something different and everyone paid attention. And so I started doing more of that.
Is there the potential for a writer to get themselves in trouble if they are using content on their blog that they think they're later going to turn around, package up and sell as a book? Are there areas that they should sort of tread carefully in that regard as far as repurposing stuff or putting their best writing out on their blog and getting into trouble later if they're trying to roll it into a book?
There's generally nothing to be afraid of here. I think the fears greatly outweigh any actual harm that could ever occur. And of course, I just told the story of how I essentially repurposed my blog into a book. Of course, I self-published it, but the book did really well, showing you that there's not cannibalization. Just because the content's free on your blog doesn't mean people aren't going to buy the book. Sometimes it's not the same audience, so you're broadening your audience often. Other times people just aren't going to catch everything on your blog or they want to have the book to kind of preserve what they have learned. So it's not cannibalizing. And moreover, the book was so successful, a publisher wanted to pick it up. But by that point, it's like, why would I do that? Like, that wasn't the purpose. I'll just earn less money if you take it. So in that regard, the only thing a blog could do is bring you more visibility and more potential for a book deal, at least on the nonfiction side.
Today, we're joined by Owen Samarone. In this episode, Owen will explain how your LinkedIn profile can solidify your author brand, help you grow a network, and convert your audience to book sales. So what are some of the elements of a successful profile, first of all?
The header is really important. And I think that's like very important digital real estate that you should spend thinking on what you want to put there. I kind of push people to writing a thought-provoking question. So the minute you hop onto someone's profile, it's a question that kind of pinpoints a problem with your demographic that you're trying to reach. So it really gets them to think versus, oh, here's another headshot, or here's you on stage, or here's the books that you've written. I almost would say steer away from that and really use that digital real estate to capture the eyeballs of your ideal viewer and make them think about something that, you're ultimately providing the solution for. So that's one crucial idea. I think it goes without saying, but I'll mention it. But obviously, a high quality profile picture, I think, is very important. I think there's goodwill to kind of creating a colored background, solid color background to kind of associate your face and your name and your brand with a color. I see that kind of works well with some authors. For your bio, a lot of people just write keynote speaker, best-selling author, executive coach, very general terms that don't tell me exactly what you're up to. I would spend the first X amount of characters, your first line of your bio, using what I call a TMS, your transformational marketing statement. And that's essentially a statement that just says, I help who, do what, and maybe add some, personalization on the back end, maybe your unique IP or your unique process. And from just those three elements alone, I think you're really able to convey what you're all about and what you're doing. You got them thinking about the header, you see that they're a real person, they have a great headshot, and then you see that bio and it's like, oh, I'm their demographic and I want to get out of this pain or move towards this pleasure. I want to go and interact with this person. I try to treat the whole profile as a landing page ultimately. And the featured section, instead of kind of using it for your highlights or accolades, I think the first tile should be a way to get in contact with you. So I encourage people to have like your book a call Calendly link on that first tile. But if it's to your contact form on your website, I think that's a really great play. If I come to Tanya's profile and I want to get in touch with you, but I can't find how to get in touch with you, that's going to cause some friction and maybe allow me not to be in touch with you.
How does one begin to build their network and make sure that it's filled with the right type of people who are primed to receive whatever their book's message is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. I think all the conversations we want to have around our book topic or around our subject matter is already happening. We just need to join that conversation. It's one thing to share your original thought when you're a small creator on LinkedIn. It's like you on the top of a mountain screaming at the top of your lungs. But then for you to go join a crowded marketplace where everyone's talking about the same thing, that's a much better play for you to get your good word out. So go find those crowded marketplaces, which are other people's posts or other people's profiles, and comment something genuine about the post. And I think there's just a quick nuance there too. I call it a dream list. And there's two levels. There's the relatable list, and then there's the living legend list. So the living legend's more like the Brene Browns and the Tony Robbins, who are maybe just really way too big or out of our sphere of influence. 20% of your effort should be engaging with those folks just to kind of be around a post that's getting a lot of engagement. But the most of your effort should be around this relatable list, which is essentially like other people sharing the stage with you or getting booked for the similar gigs as you are with your book, or obviously writing about similar topics of the book, and kind of banding together with those people who share similar ideas as you, connecting with them, being on their podcast, engaging with them on LinkedIn. The list could go on there.
That's it for our episode today. We hope you enjoyed this look back at some of our favorite bits of publishing advice from the past year, and we look forward to bringing you another great year of industry insight ahead.
You can also find advice for writing, publishing, and promoting your work in my book, Ideas, Influence, and Income, which you can learn more about at ideasinfluenceandincome.com. A big thank you to Madison Johnson, who produces the Published podcast. We will be back with another episode on the last Tuesday of next month.